You might be wondering if the doctors forgot to say something about the rabbit here having little to no relation with the rabbit killed during the wedding. In fact, the rabbit memento is given almost no attention from this point onward, even though it's clearly an absurd connection. You might be thinking that perhaps it has some significance in this memory, but as it will soon become apparent, it is of little, if any, relevance. Furthermore, this incident here pokes even more holes with the little stunt Watts had to pull to get a memento out of Johnny back in the 6th entry. I mean, if the memento doesn't have to actually connect two memories meaningfully, why not make it any trivial thing? Not only is this yet another cheap slapstick scene, all that happens here is making Watts even more of a punching bag. We've progressed up to Johnny's premarital life now, and this is where the doctors stand, still too absorbed in their petty squabbles to usefully deduce anything about the patient or his request. Her note berates Watts and gets rewritten by him when he rejoins. That's one of the few genuinely funny moments in this game, and is also likely the only reason to visit the notes page. This whole sequence is bizarre. We end up doing little in terms of investigation, mostly just ramming people with an ethereal horse and unscrewing Watts out of a mess he got himself in. I also have to comment on how odd the memory links are. Is simply touching the patient's relatives enough to make them know? At least the memento makes some sense this time. This scene mostly just confirms that River had autism, Johnny had her diagnosed for it, and, as alluded to in the previous memory, had attempted equine therapy for a while. It's rather dreary and long-winded for what it does, especially since it doesn't progress the plot in a meaningful manner. The only thing of interest in this scene is Johnny refusing to read a book on his fiance's condition, which could charitably perhaps be interpreted as an attempt to build his character, but mostly ends up just being mild foreshadowing for something which should have been revealed quite a bit earlier. The clock is another nonsensical memento. It has pretty little to connect it to the clock back in the clinic, especially since this one doesn't tick, and is in a room generally filled with people. Note also that, contrary to most memories before River's death so far, this doesn't have River near or alongside him. The doctors will make much of this fact soon. Watts being a giant douchebag, as is to be expected. I hope by now my problem with such scenes has been thoroughly established so I don't have to trot them out again every time they happen. I'm not sure whether I prefer the characters be hollow over being characterized as incredibly unlikable people like here. So, is trying to interact with Johnny enough for memory links now? First touching his relatives, now just thinking of talking to him? What next? Will the mere sight of him give memory links? Not only is this a bizarre sequence, it's also wholly unnecessary. Presumably it's Rosaline searching for River, but in that case, she wouldn't be silhouetted, would she? Given that Johnny clearly remembers her in nearly every other memory, she would have been fairly visible if she was in the crowd. While the scene above was clever about displaying River's autism and how it influenced her relationship with Johnny, it again failed to build the two any further than currently established. By itself, this would have been a cute, if unremarkable scene. However, the fact that this far into Johnny's life we still lack clear definition for either him or his wife, who is prominent through most of his life, is rather troubling. I appreciate that this scene shows the two teenage boys acting with the same brashness and nervousness most teenagers would exhibit in high school. And the dialogue between our couple here is a clever play on just how awkward his nervousness meeting her autism is. It's very believable, and for a moment makes the two feel like people with dimensions, despite their rather bare-bones characterization so far. In contrast, Watts' childish reaction to Rosaline digs him even deeper into douchebag territory, while Rosaline continues to maintain a calm and collected front. I must say, I'm seriously impressed at how dedicated she's been to the work, her odd bouts of sentimentalism and squabbles with Neil notwithstanding. Unlike a lot of attempts at humor in this game, the above sequences genuinely bring amusement, especially since they don't happen at the expense of the main plot. The best one in my opinion is the one involving the art teacher making their class draw barrels, because it really channels both their absurd belief and contrasts Johnny's and Nicholas's attitudes toward it, while being couched in believable words. The one required scene is not some throwaway attempt at slapstick humor or a sentimental scene, but rather characterization by illustrating River as a knowledgeable and rather wordy student, thus giving her an alternate angle and letting her expand beyond girl with autism who likes lighthouses. Unfortunately, the story will make little effort to capitalize on this. A pretty long conversation that sheds some critical light on Johnny's relationship with River. Basically, he started this relationship for selfish reasons, and it would seem like part of that remained later, all the way until River died. This is a pretty unflattering look at him, which makes all the attempts at building sympathy for him look a bit dishonest. Nicholas is depicted as a very pragmatic person with fairly accurate insights into people. He also was bold about calling out Johnny's wrongs here. It's a shame he seems to not play much of a role later in Johnny's life. Perhaps some of his insight could have rubbed off on Johnny and given him a happier relationship. The doctors, for once, seem to do their duty and talk about the case, though not before understandably berating their client. Rosaline rightfully seems to think that there's a deeper cause behind River's rabbit making, and that being triggered by Johnny's confession of his embarrassing crush doesn't mean it was the primary trigger. I wish it was Watts who made this observation instead. As much as I've been hard on him, it would fit nicely into the brief characterization he got in the 7th entry of being an incredulous person who looks beneath the surface of the situation. But instead, it's Rosaline who upends him, making him feel redundant even when he's not being dickish. One last thing. Even though the game pulled some blatant narrative cheating, there was no good reason to keep his motivation for proposing to River under wraps. Showing it back then would have made his conversations with Nicholas and Isabel have more weight, as well as perhaps show character growth if he'd been written to be more genuinely concerned and caring for River, and more apologetic for his crush.